The moment my daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye across the dinner table and said, "Victor, you're too old to run anything anymore. It's time to step aside and let the younger generation take over." Something inside me that had been quiet for too long finally snapped. But I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I simply set down my fork, looked at my son Carl sitting there like a deer in headlights, and walked out of what I thought was my own home. My name is Victor Martinez. I'm 58 years old. And until 18 months ago, I thought I had life figured out. I built Martinez Construction from nothing. Started with a used pickup truck and a toolbox, turned it into a $2 million business over 30 years. My wife Dorothy and I, we were partners in everything. Then that drunk driver took her away from me on Highway 45, and suddenly I was trying to figure out how to live without the woman who'd been my compass for 3 decades. That's how I ended up moving in with my son Carl and his wife Miranda. They said it would be temporary, just until I got back on my feet. Miranda even offered to help with the business side of things. She had a marketing degree, said she could modernize our approach. I thought it was kindness. I was wrong. For 8 months, I watched Miranda slowly take over. She moved into the company office, started handling client communications, began scheduling meetings without asking me. When I questioned anything, she'd smile and say, "Oh, Victor, don't worry about these details. You should be relaxing, enjoying your golden years." Golden years at 58. Like I was some doddering old man ready for a nursing home. The house on Elm Street had been Carl and Miranda's for 3 years, a modest 2-story colonial with white siding and black shutters. Dorothy and I had helped them with the down payment when they got married. The living room had an open floor plan that connected to the kitchen, where we usually ate dinner around a rectangular oak table that seated 6. That's where it all came to a head. It was a Tuesday night in November. The leaves were turning outside the bay window, and I could smell the pot roast I'd been cooking since 3 p.m., Dorothy's recipe with carrots, potatoes, and that special blend of herbs she'd perfected over the years. Miranda barely touched her food, which should have been my first clue something was coming. "Victor, we need to have a serious conversation," she said, setting down her fork with deliberate precision. Her voice took on that tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable, like she was explaining something to a child. I looked up from cutting my meat. "What's on your mind, Miranda? You're 58 years old. Most men your age are thinking about retirement, not trying to run a construction company." Carl shifted in his seat but kept his eyes on his plate. My granddaughter Susan, 16 and sharp as a tack, stopped chewing and watched the exchange with those intelligent eyes she'd inherited from Dorothy. "I'm not most men, Miranda, and I built that company with my own 2 hands. That was then," she continued, her voice getting colder. "Things are different now. The industry has changed. You can't keep up with the technology, the new regulations, the way business is done today." The dining room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. The pendant light hanging over our table cast shadows that seemed to dance across Miranda's face as she spoke. Besides, she smiled, but there was ice in her eyes. Accidents happen all the time in construction. Men your age, their reflexes aren't what they used to be. Their judgment gets cloudy. It would be terrible if something happened because you insisted on staying involved when you should have stepped back. That wasn't concern. That was a threat. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire you can't quite locate. "If you think I'm stepping aside," I said quietly, setting my knife and fork down parallel on my plate the way Dorothy had taught me, "you're mistaken." Miranda's mask slipped for just a second. Something cold and calculating flashed across her face before the concerned daughter-in-law expression returned. "Victor, you're being unrealistic. This house, the business, everything is going to be Carl's eventually anyway. Why not make the transition now, while you can still enjoy your retirement?" "Whose house?" I asked. She blinked. "What? You said this house. Whose house is it?" Miranda laughed, but it sounded forced, like glass breaking in slow motion. "It's Carl's house, obviously. We've been living here for 3 years." I stood up from the table slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Actually, Miranda, it's my house. The deed is in my name, always has been. Same with the business." The silence that followed was deafening. Carl stared at his plate like it might provide answers. Susan's eyes went wide, but she stayed quiet. Miranda's face cycled through confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked almost like panic. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Check the county records," I said, pulling my napkin from my lap and placing it beside my plate. "I'll be in my room." I walked through the living room, past the fireplace where Dorothy's photo still sat on the mantel, and climbed the stairs to the guest room that had become my temporary home. My heart was pounding, but for the first time in months I felt like myself again. I also knew I'd just declared war. The next morning, Miranda was gone before I got up at 6 a.m. Her car wasn't in the driveway, and there was no coffee made, something she'd done every morning since I moved in, always making a point to mention how she was taking care of me. Carl left for his job at Henderson Associates architecture firm without saying a word, just grabbed a banana and walked out the front door like he was afraid to make eye contact. Only Susan talked to me, and what she said changed everything. "Grandpa," she whispered as I was making coffee in the kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the window above the sink, "I need to show you something." She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots of text messages. Miranda had been messaging someone called Coach B for months. The messages were brief but clear, updates about my health, my declining mental state, discussions about accelerating timelines. "She's been planning this for a long time, Grandpa," Susan said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard her on the phone last week talking about life insurance policies. She thought I was asleep, but I was doing homework in my room. My blood ran cold. I thought about Dorothy's accident, about how Miranda had been so helpful afterward, so eager to take care of arrangements, about how she'd suggested I move in with them for my own safety, about how she'd volunteered to handle the business communications while I was grieving." "There's more," Susan said, scrolling through more screenshots. "Look at this one from last month." The message read, "V getting suspicious about business decisions. Need to move faster on succession plan. Client meeting next week will position as his idea. I remembered that meeting. Miranda had suggested we bring in a business consultant to help with modernization. The consultant had recommended transferring more operational control to younger leadership, meaning Miranda herself. Susan, how long have you been watching this? Since Mom started acting weird around you, she used to be nice when Dad wasn't around, but lately she's been different. Cold, and she's always on her phone texting that Coach B person." I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Miranda had delivered her ultimatum 12 hours earlier. The morning light coming through the window felt different now, sharper somehow. "Grandpa, there's something else. Mom's been going through your stuff when you're at the hardware store. I saw her in your room last week looking through your desk. That afternoon, I drove to my old house, the one Dorothy and I had shared for 25 years on Maple Drive. It was a small ranch-style home with blue shutters and a garden Dorothy had spent decades perfecting. I'd been renting it out since moving in with Carl and Miranda, but the tenants had just moved out. The place felt hollow without Dorothy's presence, but it was still home. I stood in our bedroom, surrounded by dust and memories, and opened the safe Dorothy and I had installed behind her vanity mirror. The combination was our wedding anniversary, 10/15/89. Inside, beneath our insurance papers and the business incorporation documents, I found an envelope with my name on it in Dorothy's elegant handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Dorothy had always been the organized one, the planner, but this was different. This was like she'd known something I didn't. "Victor," the letter began, "if you're reading this, Miranda has made her move. I've been watching her for 2 years and I know what she is. I hired a private investigator. Her real name is Patricia Reed, and she's done this before." The folder underneath the letter was thick, filled with photographs, court documents, and investigators' notes. Miranda, or Patricia Reed, had targeted an elderly businessman in Phoenix 5 years ago, a widower named Eugene Whitman, who owned a successful landscaping company. The pattern was identical. She'd met Eugene at a coffee shop, the same coffee shop she'd been frequenting for weeks before he ever showed up. She'd presented herself as a marketing consultant, wormed her way into his business, isolated him from his adult children, and positioned herself to inherit his company when he died. Eugene's death had been ruled accidental, a fall from a ladder while inspecting a job site. But his children had contested the will, claiming Patricia had manipulated a vulnerable old man. The case dragged on for 18 months before being settled out of court. Patricia collected an $800,000 inheritance and disappeared. 2 years later, she surfaced in our town with a new last name and met my son at a coffee shop that, according to the investigator's notes, she'd been frequenting for weeks before Carl ever showed up. Dorothy had seen it all. While I was grieving and vulnerable, she'd been building a case. The letter included contact information for an attorney named Margaret Collins who specialized in elder financial abuse. "I couldn't tell you while I was alive," Dorothy's letter continued. "You would have confronted her directly, and she would have disappeared like smoke. But now you have everything you need to protect yourself and our family." I sat on our old bed holding Dorothy's letter, and for the first time since her funeral, I smiled. My wife had been protecting me from beyond the grave. I called Margaret Collins that evening from the kitchen of my old house, standing at the same counter where Dorothy used to make her famous chocolate chip cookies. "Mr. Martinez," Margaret said, "your wife contacted me 2 years ago. She was very thorough. We have everything we need." Everything for what? To destroy Miranda's entire operation. She's made several mistakes this time. She moved too fast, got too comfortable. And thanks to your wife's preparation, we have a paper trail that will bury her. Margaret explained that Dorothy had been monitoring Miranda's activities for months before her death. She'd recorded conversations using a small device hidden in her purse. She documented Miranda's gradual takeover of business operations. She'd even had Miranda investigated criminally. Your wife was remarkable, Margaret said. She anticipated every move Miranda would make. She set up monitoring on all your business accounts. She documented the client manipulation. She even identified the shell corporation Miranda established to funnel money. What shell corporation? Reed Business Solutions. Miranda's been slowly transferring Martinez construction contracts to her own company. She's been skimming 15% off every job for the past 6 months. We estimate she's stolen approximately $75,000 so far. The next few days were a blur. Margaret's team worked fast. We discovered that Miranda had been spreading rumors to our biggest clients that I was losing it mentally and that they should be dealing directly with her. She'd convinced 3 major contractors to sign new agreements with Reed Business Solutions instead of Martinez Construction, but Dorothy had anticipated all of this. She'd set up automatic alerts on every business account. She'd created a backup system that tracked every client communication. She'd even installed security cameras in the office that Miranda didn't know about. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, recorded conversations, security footage of Miranda accessing files after hours, emails between Miranda and Coach B discussing the timeline for my retirement. Coach B, it turned out, was Miranda's mother, Beverly Reed, who lived in Nevada and had a criminal record for elder financial abuse dating back 15 years. We're ready, Margaret told me on Friday afternoon. All we need to do is spring the trap. Margaret scheduled a family meeting for the following Thursday. She called it an estate planning session and invited Carl and Miranda to her office to discuss Victor's succession plans. The trap was set perfectly. Margaret's office was located in a converted Victorian house on Oak Street, with high ceilings and tall windows that let in streams of afternoon light. The conference room had a long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs, and the walls were lined with law books and framed certificates. It looked exactly like the kind of place where serious business got handled. Miranda showed up dressed like she was going to a funeral. All black, very somber, playing the concerned daughter-in-law perfectly. She wore a conservative blazer and carried a leather portfolio, looking every inch the responsible family member who was only thinking about what was best for everyone involved. Carl looked nervous, like he knew something was wrong, but couldn't figure out what. He kept checking his phone and shifting in his chair, avoiding eye contact with me. I could tell he'd been getting pressure at home, probably Miranda working on him all week about how unreasonable I was being. Thank you both for coming, Margaret said, settling into her chair with the calm confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. Victor has asked me to review some concerns about the family business and estate planning. She opened a manila folder and slid a photograph across the polished table. It showed a younger Miranda with different hair color, standing next to an elderly man outside a construction office with Whitman landscaping painted on the window. Mrs. Martinez, Margaret said, "Can you explain your relationship with Eugene Whitman?" The color drained from Miranda's face. For a moment, she just stared at the photograph like it might disappear if she looked hard enough. "I don't know who that is," she said finally, but her voice was shaky. Margaret smiled the way a chess player smiles when they see checkmate coming. She produced another document from the folder. "This is Mr. Whitman's death certificate. He died 5 years ago after naming Patricia Reed, your maiden name, as the sole beneficiary of his $800,000 estate." Carl was staring at the photo, then at his wife, then at the document spread across the table. "Miranda, what is this? Who is Patricia Reed?" "It's lies," Miranda said. But her hands were trembling now. "They're trying to frame me for something I didn't do." Margaret pressed a button on a small recorder she'd placed on the table. Dorothy's voice filled the room, clear and strong despite the fact that she'd been sick when she made the recording. "Miranda, I know you think Victor doesn't see what you're doing, but I see everything. I've been watching you manipulate him, isolate him from the business, position yourself to take over when he dies." Then came Miranda's voice, cold and calculating. "Dorothy, you're not going to live forever, and when you're gone, Victor will need someone to take care of him, someone who understands the business. Someone like me." The recording continued with Miranda discussing accidents and declining mental capacity and how these things happen to older men in construction all the time. "Ohio is a one-party consent state," Margaret explained calmly. "These recordings are completely admissible in court." Carl's face had gone white. He was looking at his wife like he'd never seen her before. "Miranda, tell me this isn't real. Tell me you didn't threaten my mother when she was dying of cancer." Miranda tried to stand, but Margaret wasn't finished. She produced another stack of documents from her seemingly endless folder. "We've also frozen all business accounts pending investigation of financial irregularities." The shell corporation you set up, Reed Business Solutions, has been reported to the state attorney general for fraud and embezzlement. She slid a bank statement across the table. You've stolen $78,000 from Martinez Construction over the past 8 months. Every transaction is documented. Your clients have also been notified. Margaret continued relentlessly. Hartley Commercial, Davidson Properties, and Riverside Development have all been informed about the contract irregularities and the unauthorized transfer of their agreements to your personal company. The room felt like it was spinning around Miranda. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her carefully constructed world collapsing in real time. "This is insane," she whispered. "Victor, you can't believe this. I've been helping you, I've been taking care of you since Dorothy died." But Carl was reading through the investigation file now, his face getting darker with each page he turned. "The timeline matches," he said quietly. "Everything matches. The coffee shop where we met, the way you asked about Dad's business on our second date, how eager you were to help after Mom died. Carl, please, you have to believe me, the security footage." Margaret interrupted, sliding a tablet across the table. The screen showed Miranda in the Martinez construction office at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, rifling through file cabinets and photographing documents with her phone. "This was taken last month," Margaret said. "We have 47 hours of similar footage showing you accessing confidential files, copying client lists, and removing original contracts." Miranda's lawyer, some kid she'd hired that morning when she realized this wasn't actually an estate planning meeting, tried to object, but Margaret had already prepared separation papers and asset recovery agreements. "You have two choices," Margaret said, her voice still calm, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Sign these documents relinquishing all claims to the Martinez family assets and business. Agree to return all stolen funds and leave quietly. Or we file criminal charges in 2 states for elder financial abuse, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit fraud." She paused for effect. "The evidence package will also go to the FBI, since this appears to be part of a pattern involving interstate commerce and your mother's criminal enterprise in Nevada." Miranda looked around the room desperately, at Carl, who was staring at the security footage with disgust, at me sitting quietly in my chair, at Margaret, who held her entire future in a manila folder. "How long do I have to decide?" Miranda asked, her voice barely audible. "You decide now," Margaret said, placing a pen on the table next to the documents in this room today. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Outside the tall windows, I could see people walking by on Oak Street, going about their normal lives while Miranda's carefully constructed scheme crumbled around her. She picked up the pen with shaking hands. Miranda signed every document with a hand that trembled so badly she could barely hold the pen. Each signature seemed to drain something vital from her confidence, her composure, her carefully constructed facade. By the time she finished, she looked like a completely different person than the woman who'd walked into Margaret's office an hour earlier. She signed the property relinquishment, giving up any claim to the house on Elm Street. She signed the business asset waiver, returning her stake in Martinez Construction. She signed the custody agreement that gave Carl full parental rights over Susan. And finally, she signed the financial restitution agreement, promising to return the $78,000 she'd stolen. "The funds will be transferred back to Martinez Construction within 48 hours. Margaret said, collecting the signed documents. "You have 72 hours to remove your personal belongings from the family residence. After that, any remaining items will be considered abandoned property." Miranda stood up slowly, like she was moving through water. She looked at Carl one last time, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. He was still staring at the security footage on the tablet, watching his wife steal from his family in the middle of the night. "Carl," she said softly, "this isn't over. I'm still your wife. I'm still Susan's mother." "No," Carl said, his voice flat and final. "You're not. You're Patricia Reed, and I don't know who the hell that is." Miranda picked up her purse and walked to the door. She paused for a moment with her hand on the brass handle, like she might say something else, but then she just opened it and left. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded like the end of everything. We sat in silence for several minutes after she was gone. Carl was rubbing his temples, and I could see his hands shaking slightly. Margaret was organizing her papers with the efficient movements of someone who'd handled dozens of these cases. "What happens now?" Carl asked finally. "Now we wait and see if she complies with the agreements," Margaret said. "If she doesn't, we file the criminal charges. But in my experience, people like Miranda don't want to spend the next 10 years in federal prison. She'll comply." Carl looked at me across the table. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have seen what she was doing. I should have protected you. You were in love," I said. "Love makes us blind sometimes. Your mother knew that. She didn't blame you, and neither do I." The drive back to Elm Street was quiet. Carl followed me in his car, And when we got to the house, Susan was waiting on the front porch. She must have seen something in our faces because she ran down the steps and hugged me tight. "Is it over, Grandpa?" she asked. "It's over, sweetheart." That evening, the three of us sat around the kitchen table, the same table where Miranda had delivered her ultimatum just a week earlier. But this time, it felt different, lighter somehow. Susan was doing her homework while Carl and I went through business documents, planning how to transition operations back to normal. "Dad," Carl said, looking up from a client contract, "I want to learn the business properly, not just the architecture side, but everything, the way you and Mom built it." "It's going to take time," I said. 30 years of experience doesn't transfer overnight." "I know, but I want to try. I want to be worthy of what you've built." Over the next few weeks, we rebuilt Martina's construction piece by piece. Carl quit his job at the architecture firm and came to work with me full-time. We contacted every client Miranda had stolen and explained the situation. Most of them were understanding. They'd been doing business with Martina's construction for years and trusted our reputation. The stolen money was returned as promised. Miranda's bank accounts were liquidated to cover the restitution, and she disappeared from town as quietly as she'd arrived 5 years earlier. Word got around the construction industry about what had happened, and her reputation was finished. No one would hire Patricia Reed or Miranda Martinez or whatever name she decided to use next. A month after the confrontation, I moved back into the house on Maple Drive. Susan convinced me it was time to come home, and she was right. The place felt different without Dorothy, but it was still home. Carl helped me repaint the kitchen and fix the loose boards on the front porch that I'd been meaning to get to for months. Susan came by every day after school. She'd sit at Dorothy's old desk in the living room and do her homework while I worked in the garage, organizing tools and planning the next day's jobs. Sometimes she'd help me with estimates, showing me how to use the computer software that had intimidated me when Miranda was running things. "Grandpa," she said one afternoon while we were reviewing a bid for a commercial renovation, "are you going to be okay? I mean, really okay?" I looked at my granddaughter, this smart, observant young woman who'd seen through Miranda's act when the adults around her were fooled. "I'm better than okay, Susan. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The business was thriving again. Without Miranda's interference and theft, our profit margins improved dramatically. Carl was learning fast, asking the right questions, showing the kind of judgment that comes from genuinely caring about the work, rather than just seeing it as a means to an end. 6 months later, I was standing in the backyard of the Maple Drive house, watching Carl and Susan install a new deck they'd designed together. The spring air was warm, and I could smell the apple blossoms from the tree Dorothy had planted when we first moved in. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Collins. "Thought you'd want to know. The FBI arrested Beverly Reed in Nevada yesterday, Miranda's mother, part of a larger elder fraud ring. Your case helped build the federal prosecution." I deleted the message and put my phone away. That chapter of our lives was closed. Carl looked up from where he was measuring deck boards. "Dad, you want to give us a hand with this?" I smiled and walked over to help my son. At 58, I was just getting started on the next phase of my life. Miranda thought she could take everything I'd built because I was too old to matter. She learned the hard way that experience isn't a weakness, it's a weapon when you know how to use it. My name is Victor Martinez. I'm 58 years old, and I'm exactly where I belong. They say respect is earned, but I learned it's also protected. When someone tries to take what you've built with manipulation and lies, the quiet strength that comes from years of honest work becomes your greatest defense. Age isn't about how many years you've lived, it's about how much wisdom you've gained from those years. And sometimes, the best way to teach someone that lesson is to let them underestimate you until it's too late.